Well, hello everyone. Welcome again to another Three Blind Mice. Today, we're going to be looking at another nursery rhyme, Baa Baa Black Sheep. Have you any wool? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 3 bags full. One for the master, one for the dame, and one for the little boy who lives down the lane. Now, all of these nursery rhymes that we hear, some of them are probably very, very common to you. I'm sure some of you listening, you had that memorized. Some of you listening, maybe you hadn't heard it in decades, and so it just came back to you, kind of nostalgic. Because like with all of us, we all tend to have our favorites, or ones that just kind of sit with us from when we learned them when we were young. That was not one of my favorites, and so when I was doing research on this one for you, it came back to me. But I had really forgotten a great deal of it. But of course, I remember the title, but we want to look into this and what's the history of Baa Baa Black Sheep, and what does it have to do for us today? What is the social the political narrative of this nursery rhyme? What does it represent? What did it mean to them? What does it mean for us? Well, a lot of folks think, and this is what was happening in the United Kingdom. There was a pushback in the earlier 1900s or the mid 1900s, and especially into like the 1980s. There was a move to no longer teach the children of the primary schools in the United Kingdom Baa Baa Black Sheep because they thought it was a reference to slavery. And so the black wool to the boy down the lane and this and that. But that is not true. That's not the history behind Baa Baa Black Sheep. It really goes back to the Crusades that England was involved with towards the end of those Crusades, the latter portion of them. And when King Edward I was going through these crusades and he came back, he needed an extra tax. It was called the custom tax. He needed an extra tax to pay for his military endeavors. And so what they did was they said, all right, there is a wool tax. And wool at that time was very, very high commodity, and it brought back a large return. And so this whole thing, one for the master, one for the dame, and one for the little boy who lives down the lane, that word one was changed in modern times. Originally, in the original poem, it said none for the little boy who lives down the lane. And the master was a noble. The dame was a noble. These were noble people. They took the wool from the people. And there was none left for the little boy who lived down the lane. There was none left for the common folks. Nothing. They raised it. They produced it. But they got none of the harvest. It all went to the noble people to pay for their, in my opinion, extremely unholy, unjust war, you could say, or in the name of God, in the name of evangelism, these crusades. And so the passage that I come to is found in Mark chapter 12, and then we're going to tie it into what's happening today and what could be coming for the church here in the future. Mark chapter 12, beginning in verse 13, and they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus in order to trap him in a statement. We know that they were doing this all the time with Jesus, trying to catch him saying something that was against God's law. And they came and they said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are truthful. Now, first off, they didn't believe he was a rabbi, but they just said this to him. They're trying to be politically correct. They're trying to butter him up, right? Rabbi, we know that you are truthful and defer to no one. They don't believe he's truthful. They think that he's saying the words of the devil. Oh, he's performing miracles. He must be performing miracles by the devil, by Beelzebub, right? And so they don't believe this. They are really painting it on thick here. We know that you are truthful and you defer to no one. In other words, he doesn't worship anyone. He doesn't prefer anyone over the other. Well, we know that they don't believe that's true because what does he do? He did not come to give the gospel to the wealthy, but to the poor. He did not come to heal the healthy, but the sick. He's going to the Samaritans and to the dregs of society. He's not going to wealthy sections of Jerusalem. And for different reasons, both Jesus and the Pharisees would say, yeah, that's true. But they're trying to set him up here. You are not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth. You see how the devil will twist things? He'll twist things. Is it lawful to pay a payroll tax to Caesar or not? Now, if you have done your research, you understand that all across the Roman Empire, the different areas that they had jurisdiction over, and this area of Jerusalem was one of those areas, the areas of Israel, and especially southern Judea. And to pay for certain things, they would raise taxes without any explanation. They believed that the Jews of the land, they called them dogs. They believed that they were less than human. They believed that they had an inability to think the way they did. They were not. This is why Paul, when he said he was a Roman citizen, he had higher privileges than the other Jews did. Why? Because if you're a Roman citizen, you were a normal human. If you didn't have your Roman citizenship, you were a dog. That's what they believed. And so they would raise taxes on them for no reason whatsoever. And the taxes were outlandish. We think that ours are outlandish today. I mean, 60, 70, 80, 90% of what you would produce would go to Caesar. And so this naturally was destructive. People died of starvation because of these unjust taxes. And they would just come to your house and take your money. So, shall we pay? Verse 15. Or shall we not pay? But Jesus, knowing their hypocrisy, knowing that they're trying to set him up, he said to them, why are you testing me? Why are you trying to set me up? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it, a coin. And they brought him one. And he said to them, whose likeness and inscription is on this? They said, Caesar's. He said, well, then give to Caesar what's Caesar's. Give to God what's God's. Now, there's been lots of different interpretations, and some of them, for different reasons, are applicable for the situation. But we have to look into the context here of what's really going on. Now, is Jesus teaching us a very specific interpretation through this? Yes and no. Now, first off, he's using this example here to combat the Pharisees' attempt to set him up, to combat their attempt to get him to trip over words and say something against God's law. But at the same time, I think there's something that we can take from this, especially in light of this poem, this unfair example of taking too much from people who produce it to fund unjust things. In our world today, we see this a lot. There's a lot of unjust things that take place. And a great deal of them I'm convinced we don't know about. We don't know everything that's going on with the coronavirus. If you believe everything that you hear on the news, I would say that that's extremely foolish. And I'm not just saying if you believe everything on one news network versus another. They're all corrupt. Listen, I have a broadcast communications degree, and I spent a lot of time learning about broadcasting before I went into ministry. And one of the things we learned, and you can look this up, it's very true, all the major news networks are owned by 3 or 4 conglomerates. And there are circles, there are rooms. You know, we would say is it smoke-filled rooms with higher-ups that sit with their pipes or whatever. There are these rooms, and they sit and decide what is the news vernacular that we are going to push to the public about this certain subject. Okay, this network over here, you're going to take more of a liberal level. This network over here, you're going to be more towards the center. And you're going to decide what you're going to say, how you're going to report. You may say, well, that's conspiratorial. Yeah, it is, and it does happen. So don't believe everything that you hear. Don't believe everything that you see, because those who are in charge of us, we need to submit until God tells us to stand up. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Render unto God what is God's. The point is spiritual versus physical. Kingdom of heaven versus kingdom of this world. And God will intersect and intervene in the kingdom of this world. I'm not saying Christians shouldn't care about politics or things going on, but there's far too much concern and care and offense being taken about the things and stances and statements of this world in the church versus the things that are going on in heavenly realms. I have Christian friends that are more left-leaning and liberal. And they'll ask me, how could you ever be a libertarian? How could you ever be conservative? I have conservative friends that are offended that I am a libertarian in my political interpretation. And the anger, the vitriolic response that some of these people have, especially on a social media platform, it's like they grew 7 heads and 10 horns. It's like they're breathing fire. It's like I have somehow blasphemed God because I dare think differently than they do, because we know that Jesus would be a liberal. We know that Jesus would be a conservative. Render unto Caesar what's Caesar's. Render unto God what's God's. And when it comes time for God's kingdom to intersect with this one, which, by the way, that's coming, then he'll do it his way, with his timing, for his purposes. The point is not that God is calling us just to lay down and take it. No. There is coming a time in each one of our lives where we will say, okay, no more to Caesar. But that's when God says. That's when God moves. And if God is telling you, and you're the only one he's telling, more than likely, God's not saying it. Now, you might be saying, wait a second, he told prophets. Yeah, he did. He did. But their word has always ended up being confirmed. And there are a great deal of false prophets out there that say something, and it doesn't come to pass. Be careful, because you need to read in Scripture what happens to false prophets. Don't be quick to say, I believe something is true and this is what God says because I'm convicted of that. That's dangerous. That's the spirit of Antichrist. Claiming something is of God when it is clearly not. We have to be careful that we're not like Sadducees or Pharisees when it comes to this. That we're trying to come against someone else who sees something differently that we're so absolutely sure is true about the Bible. And we're going to use it, manipulate it, and cause it to push forward our own agenda or supply our own unholy, unjust focus. And we come against someone else who shares the same faith in Jesus Christ and his death, burial, and resurrection and coming again that we do. Render unto Caesar what's Caesar's. Render unto God what's God's. Thank you for joining me today on Three Blind Mice. We'll see you next time.